Hi, I'm Heather Hunley with Look Up Indiana, and today I'm here with Janet Jordan Altmeyer with Trinity English Lutheran Church. Janet is the Director of City Ministry, and Trinity English is dedicated to establishing a mental health ministry by raising awareness through education, training, and listening to the stories of members and neighbors. Janet, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So we're preparing to add some resources on Look Up surrounding the faith community and mental health. And you recently caught our attention with a publication that you did that was called Thinking Out Loud About the Stories We Don't Tell. So one thing that I loved on your inside cover, your pastor writes, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read that here. One of the most burdensome things we can impose on one another is the burden of silence. Having to carry the weight of a situation or a problem alone can cause a nearly unspeakable burden. If we believe even a bit of the statistics, we know that many of our friends, neighbors, and fellow church members are carrying huge burdens of which they believe they cannot speak. We should find a way to crack the door open just a bit for their sakes. So it sounds like this publication is one way that you're cracking that door open, or as we like to say with Look Up, we kind of start the conversation and silence the stigma around mental illness. Why is your church focusing on mental and behavioral health education?
We started the city ministry with the idea that the mental health ministry would go hand in hand. We really could not envision having a city ministry without mental health ministry because it really is not about us helping them. It's not about us hearing their stories. It is about listening to one another, being present with one another, praying with and for one another. And I believe it's such a strong first step in getting away from the us and them mentality. And that's really what we're called to do as children of God and of Christ, is to be present with one another with that love that has been given to us.
So would you say, if I would ask you what goals do you have, it sounds like that's one goal in itself, being present.
It is. And I think that we collectively at Trinity English believe that stigma is caused largely by lack of experience. So the education piece we're hoping will come by engaging our members and our staff and our neighbors together by listening and telling stories, but also by experiencing events in the community and embarking upon opportunities that provide for companionship and getting to know one another, because that's where we feel stigma can be reduced.
Okay. So besides the publication, which is a great resource, what are the other things you've been doing in the vein of mental behavioral health?
It's been a full year. We started with a partnership with Caris House as part of Fort Wayne's Rescue Ministries.
Okay.
And we had an art exhibit that shared stories of homelessness. And we partnered with the University of St. Francis in that endeavor. So it was an art exhibit with stories, perceived stories that were shared by individuals at Caris House who observed the photographs and then shared their story.
Oh, wow.
And that was part of an art exhibit that coincided with the longest night walk that culminated at Trinity English.
Okay.
So we started there, and then later we had another art exhibit, and we partnered with the Fort Wayne Sexual Assault Treatment Center and Park Center for the Shine exhibit, which was telling stories of people who have survived trauma, especially sexual assault, and stories of recovery. So we displayed several of the canvases that had been painted by survivors of trauma, and then also the paragraphs, the narratives that came with those canvases. And so that allowed for some conversation to start about what is trauma, what is a trauma-informed congregation, how do we support one another, because each of us at some time in our life has probably experienced some kind of trauma. That can be a house fire, it can be an assault or a violation of one's rights, it can be violence in general, it can be a traumatic event such as a life event or something that happens in our nation. So none of us really is spared completely from that in our lifetime, but how do we support one another as people go through the recovery process? And certainly, as part of that, we wanted to make people aware of resources like Look Up and our community agencies that are supportive of people who have experienced trauma. It's something that we often haven't talked about in churches.
Right. One of the things that you and I were chatting with before we started recording was a program that you do called You Talk, I Listen.
Yes.
So do you want to tell us more about that?
Well, sure. It has really been, well, I think it's been great fun. And the pastors, Pastor Erdis and Pastor Haller, and I at different times go on Thursdays to Fryman Square, and we set up 2 chairs. And there's no agenda. It's just simply to provide an opportunity for someone to share his or her story, and whatever that might be. And it's been interesting because we've had people come up who have been known as neighbors of Trinity English several years ago, and they've come to get us caught up on their story.
Wow.
Which has been really interesting. Some of those people had been previously homeless, and now they're helping others in the community to gain security in their living. And it's also been an opportunity for people to say, well, what's this about?
Mm-hmm.
And more often than not, people have been very positive and have responded to the fact that it seems like basic human decency,
Mm-hmm.
that just the opportunity to listen,
Mm-hmm.
to engage with one another without having any sort of agenda or purpose in mind other than to care.
A human connection.
That way. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, one thing that you say in this publication is that stories matter, and that sounds exactly like what you're doing. You're giving someone the opportunity to share their story,
Mm-hmm.
and that it matters. What can churches and other organizations do to help you in what you're doing, and how can we learn more?
We know from the very beginning that the community partnerships are so important, and that includes our partnership with the Lutheran Foundation, with our mental health agencies. It also includes our partnerships with neighbors close by, such as landlords and the Rescue Mission and others who are partnering with people and providing services and care and housing for people who perhaps feel more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Not all, but many do. So how can we look for those gaps? Pastor Erdis likes the expression of mind the gap from London, so that we might seek out those situations where people are perhaps looking for a little bit more support, and we can help to fill those areas in. And again, I want to be very careful to say that we are designing this as a mutual opportunity. It's always with and for.
Mm-hmm. No toxic charity.
No, even more than that, I would say, Heather, an idea that the nature of developing community is based on beginning to understand and appreciate one another and what each of us has been through and where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
And that's authentic. And if it's authentic, it can be sustainable. And that's one of the main boxes that we try to tick whenever we develop a partnership with a community agency or a group. Is it sustainable through those natural protocols and events?
That's great. So you're, I just love so many quotes from this publication. I want to read one more that might spark any final stories you want to leave with us. As your publication says, these human conversations, so human conversation to me equals authentic.
Mm-hmm.
These human conversations might change the world, change our community, change our congregations, or change our families, one conversation at a time. So we are very excited for what you're doing, what Trinity English Church is doing, and all your organizations. Are there any final stories or anything you'd like to leave with us?
We are placing a lot of emphasis on companionship ministry. And that's exactly what we've been describing, that walking side by side. It's moving away from a notion of tolerance, just tolerance,
Mm-hmm.
and moving into engagement. It's also moving away from a notion of rescue or fixing,
Mm-hmm.
which is difficult for a lot of us who've grown up in situations where that has some degree of satisfaction, or we're kind of prone to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it moves away from that model to walking side by side and developing healthy boundaries as part of that, in addition to healthy boundaries, looking for ways where the natural relationships can build and move forward in a way that seems pleasant and supportive to people without it seeming contrived or having a lot of institutions kind of get in the way of that natural process.
Mm-hmm.
We are, a little plug if I may,
Absolutely.
we're going to be having a companionship ministry training, largely because the Lutheran Foundation is partnering with Trinity English Lutheran Church.
Okay.
And we're having Kay Eaton from Seattle, Washington come on August 29th, 30th, and 31st. And on the 30th, there's going to be a 3-hour only free opportunity for that companionship ministry training.
Okay.
And then the next day, if people, there are several of us who would like to receive the facilitator training so that we can teach and coach the model beyond that encounter,
Mm-hmm.
that will be the next day, and that's an all-day event.
Okay.
So if anybody's interested, we would love to have them contact us for more information.
Okay, great.
And that will be held at Trinity English.
Okay. Well, we will put information on that event that Janet just shared with us on Lookup on the events. We'd also like to share their Thinking Out Loud about the stories we don't tell on Lookup, as well as a resource. And Janet, one thing we want to start doing on these little candid conversations is kind of a plug for us. Our Lookup t-shirts, I don't know if you're a t-shirt person, but we have our
Sure.
tagline, Start the Conversation, Silence the
right.
Stigma. So that is for you as a
Thank
little
you.
thank you for being our guest.
I appreciate it.
And we thank you so much.
Thank you.